So we'll drop in and spend like a week. So we'll have fun.
February meeting of the Board of Directors of JEA will come to order. I'd like to ask everyone to stand for a moment of reflection, followed by the pledge to the flag. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mr. McElroy, safety briefing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We start every meeting at JEA with a safety briefing. And first and foremost, in the event of an emergency, Mr. Hobson will be responsible for calling 911 and securing security here. Mr. Brost will be in charge of CPR in the event that's necessary. Should we need to evacuate, we will evacuate to the stairwell to the left of the elevators as we came in. We will walk down holding the guardrail, the 19 flights of stairs, and we'll end up on the northwest corner of this building, on the corner of Main and Ashley, and I'll make sure that everybody's out of the room.
Thank you, Mr. McElroy. I'd like to call our Chief Legal Officer, Ms. Jody Brooks, for our Sunshine Law and Public Records statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a duly noticed public meeting. Minutes will be taken. There's a quorum present, and so we're in good shape to move on.
Thank you. We had previously noticed a public hearing to modify the water and sewer tariff.
And that's on the next thing on the agenda, and that has been canceled.
Thank you very much. Okay, at this time we'd like to invite members of the public to come. We've got several cards here. If you just come to the podium to my right, your left, please give your name and address and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Ms. Gutierrez. Well, I saw you get up. I thought you were walking to the microphone.
Well, it was way over there. All right. All right. Let me see if I can test 1, 2. Okay.
You got it.
All right. My name is Valerie Gutierrez. I'm the business manager of 2358. And I guess I want to start off where you left off, Mr. Howard, at the City Council. And that was, you know, it's one thing that we see how much our assets are worth. But rushing the sale of your assets is like throwing the baby with the bathwater out and not very smart. You'll regret it later. I commend the JEA leadership for paying down the debt and diversifying renewable energy sources. But we need to ask the question, who is really benefiting from the sale of JEA? It will not be the Jacksonville citizens. If it is sold, the following changes will surely occur. Loss of employment for most of the employees and local vendors JEA currently uses. Jacksonville will no longer have control of the utilities and rate structure. And we will no longer be eligible for any FEMA assistance after any natural disasters. And these costs will surely be passed down to ratepayers and citizens. No longer quick responses after natural disasters, leaving the city of Jacksonville at the mercy of the privately owned company. The individuals wanting to rush the sale of JEA will be long gone and leaving us holding the bag to future increases on property taxes and any other form of increases to the citizens of Jacksonville. And as Jake Godboll's editorial on Sunday, he said, the fact that JEA is one of only 31 publicly owned utilities in Florida is not a bad thing. It provides a guaranteed and reliable annual contribution to the city that has funded essentials like law enforcement, fire and rescue services, and the construction of needed infrastructure. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gutierrez. Appreciate your comments and your perspective. Ronnie Barris? Afternoon, Mr. Barris.
Hello, my name is Ronnie Burris, and I'm the business agent for Lionel Local 630. And as Valerie just stated, we don't believe that it's a good thing And I just want to bring up some points that, you know, I was a JEA employee and retired from here in 2010. I still consider myself a public employee because I represent some 300 members of JEA and also the city of Jacksonville. And I've worked closely with Paul and Angie and the whole executive team in negotiations and you know, in all aspects. And the part that bothers me is that it has become political, and it's not about the taxpayers no more. It seems to be political. And when you read the paper, it's the mayor says this, the council president says this, and the city council says this, and this one says that, and it's political now. That's not what's best for the taxpayers. JEA has done a great job. Paul has done a great job leading this company. And, you know, for the taxpayers' benefit, we just need to think about them. And really, as a public employee, we do work for the taxpayer. And really, that's what, you know, I want to say is that we just need to think about all of them and what's best for the taxpayers. And don't let the politics get involved in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burris. Appreciate your comments as well. Turn to our council liaison, Honorable Matt Schellenberg.
You mind if I say a few words, Chair?
No, sir. You're on the agenda. I expect you to say a few words.
That's fair. Chair and board members, I just come here. I'm a city council member and I represent Mandarin District. And yes, 6 years ago I suggested that the JEA should look at selling this operation for one particular reason, to know what the true value of it is. And then we can determine, once the value, then we can determine if it's good or bad for the city of Jacksonville. And here we are 6 years later, and looking at the market, it looks like an ideal time to actually look at it more seriously. And I would suggest to the board and to the chair that we have a workshop to determine if it's beneficial to the taxpayers and the city to sell it at this point in time. And I look at it a little bit differently. JEA's had its ups and downs. It had the oil crisis, the coal, the coal business is going down. We're into natural gas, and now we're moving into solar. As Mr. McElroy said, that solar is almost competitive with the nuclear. But what I see in the future is, because of this is happening, people might disconnect from the big bulk JEA. And I think that we should look forward, because monopolies only last as long as somebody doesn't find a better solution. And all we have to do is look at the taxi industry. 10 years ago, I'm sure that they were just happy as a lark because they're the only ones out there. But now we had ride sharing that basically has made that world substantially different. I think Amazon has not only changed the retail business, but it's going to be changing dramatically the grocery business. I saw today that there's a Albertsons and a Rite Aid. They're in the drug business and the grocery business. They're looking to combine because the world in which we live is changing faster than sometimes we can observe and be ahead of it. And what I would like to do is have an opportunity for JEA to look forward, to see what they see in the future about electricity, about the distribution of that electricity. And some people, like my son and a lot of young people, they're disconnecting from the cable industry because the prices have gone too high. So all these things that we see now and might be seeing in the future, we should be anticipating those. And part of that is we should have a workshop to look through it intelligently, both now and in the future, and see where JEA fits into that plan. So I greatly appreciate the time you gave me, and I appreciate if you do a workshop, I'd be honored to be part of that workshop. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Schellenberg. We missed you the other night at the council meeting. I know you were not feeling well, so we're glad you're here and appreciate your comments today. I'll suggest that we take up the councilman's suggestion for a workshop during the open discussion portion of our agenda a little later. I'd also like to recognize Aaron Zahn. Mr. Zahn sitting next to Councilman Schellenberg. Mr. Zahn has been designated as an appointee of the mayor to this board and is undergoing the city council confirmation. We look forward to having you join us. Thank you, Aaron. Consent agenda, 3A. May I have a motion to approve the items listed under the consent agenda?
Mr. Chair, do you want a motion to adopt the agenda first?
Oh, did I skip that?
I think you did.
Thank you for keeping me straight.
No problem.
Yes, I'll welcome that motion to adopt the agenda.
So I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Tomer. Thank you, Reverend Newbold, for the second. All in favor of approving the agenda, adopting the agenda as presented, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Agenda is approved. Thank you very much.
No problem.
And now the consent agenda. Do I hear a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you. Ms. Flanagan, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Green. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Great. And then we'll turn to item 3B1 on the agenda, Ms. Dykes, the quarterly financial report.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Behind tab 3B1 in your board package is a review of the quarterly financial results for the first quarter of fiscal year 2018. As with other quarterly results that we've reviewed in the past, this really, the quarterly results for the first quarter of this year are a story of weather. And you'll see that in both systems. We generally, in the first quarter, had a colder than normal first quarter. That actually continued through January, which is excluded from this discussion of results. And we had more rainfall than normal. And so you'll see that in some of the water usage numbers that we'll talk about in just a minute. And we start with a review of key financial metrics. And what we look at here is a forecast for the full year based on the first quarter of results for the year. I'll caveat these forecasts by saying it's only one quarter of results, and it's a relatively low sales quarter in both systems. So it's hard to form definitive conclusions from what's happening from this first quarter of results. But so far, we're on track for preserving our healthy financial metrics through year end in both systems. We're forecasting 2.2 times debt service coverage in the electric system, 302 days of liquidity, of which 202 are cash and 65% debt to asset ratio. Water and sewer is forecasting 3 times debt service coverage, 537 days of liquidity, and a 48% debt to asset ratio through year end. From a sales perspective, year to date for the first quarter, sales in the electric system were up 6.2%, again reflective of the colder weather that we had through those first 3 months of the year. If you look, including the month of January, we're actually up year to date 11.5%. So that gives you a sense for just how cold it's been through December and January in particular and how much that's affected our results. From a financial results perspective, our total revenue for forecast for fiscal year 18 is coming in just under budget for the fiscal year, excuse me, and coming in above last year by about $15 million based on forecast, and again, that's driven by weather. On the expense side, there's a couple of line items I'd like to call out particular attention to. One is our O&M expense forecast for the electric system is $221 million. That's a pretty significant jump over last year, but it is trending down. So I do expect as we go through the remainder of the fiscal year that we'll continue to exercise that O&M expense discipline, and that number should come down pretty substantially. The other line item to note in here is non-fuel purchase power. That's pretty significantly higher than last year at $128 million. That includes a $40 million deposit into a rate stabilization fund called the Non-Fuel Purchase Power Stabilization Fund. That fund was authorized by the board and is specifically set up to fund plant Vogtle payments that are due prior to commercial operation. So that'll take us most of the way through the time period before COD for plant Vogtle. On the capital expense side, we're projecting just under $200 million in CapEx, which is tracking pretty well according to plan, and debt service, no surprises there. The bottom right-hand side of the page, I do also want to call out from a quarterly results perspective. Our target balance in the fuel fund is about $95 million, and we're right around that for the end of the first quarter. January was a pretty tough month, though, from a fuel expense perspective. So our target balance now as of the end of January, I'm sorry, our projected balance now sitting here at the end of January is $75 million, and that's a pretty big swing in a single month. If that continues to trend that direction, we will have to revisit the fuel charge at some point in the coming months. So no recommendation to do so today, but just putting that on your radar. In the water and sewer system, our sales were down 2.3% year to date. for the first quarter. That's down versus a year last year that was up pretty substantially. So this could be a renormalization, but in very low sales months for only one quarter, it's hard to see a trend yet in water and sewer. And financial results track what you'd expect based on that decrease in sales year over year. Our capital plan, I will call your attention to in the bottom section of this page. Forecasted capital expenditures are $224 million in water and sewer. That is up substantially over last year's $187 million, and last year was up substantially over the prior year. So you're starting to see those expansion projects being executed, and that's what this is reflective of here. From a debt perspective, our total debt load continues to trend downward in a very favorable direction in both systems. You do see an uptick in debt to asset ratio in the electric system on the left-hand side of this page, the black line that shifts back up this year. That shifted up because of the retirement of the St. John's River Power Park. When SJRPP was retired, we essentially wrote down the asset value associated with SJRPP, which caused that debt to asset ratio to tick up. As we continue to pay down more debt in the electric system, it will continue its trend from this new reset point. Our combined debt outstanding, our budget was 4.14% for our total portfolio. We're sitting here today at 3.82%, so very attractive funding levels and no other major issues in the debt portfolio. We include this page on risk analysis to call out any risks specifically in the debt portfolio or related to any of our counterparties for our capital structure. Right now, there are no issues to call to the board's attention. We continue to work on renewals as they come up of our credit facilities, but don't expect any issues or complications. Some good news on our investments outstanding. We have been struggling for a number of years with our investments yield as interest rates have been at historic lows for a number of years. We are now ticking up in the interest rate market, which has ticked up our overall debt cost, but it's also ticking up the yield in our investments portfolio. So we've crossed the 1% threshold a couple of months ago, and we're now sitting at 1.43%, which is a nice increase over the past couple of years. And finally, to wrap up with rates, we provide this rate comparison to the board each month, and we have had a couple of utilities that have leapfrogged over JEA, so we're now sitting at about the bottom third of rates in both the electric system and the water and sewer system. Any questions on first quarter financial results?
Any questions for Ms. Dykes? Ms. Flanagan, Mr. Cumber?
Just one question. On the on slide 11 where it says Miami/FP&L, is that just for the Miami market, or is that FP&L utility statewide?
It is just for the Miami market. What makes Miami distinct in the reason we pick one jurisdiction versus calling out FPL statewide is that every jurisdiction could potentially have a different public service tax and franchise fee. So we pick one representative jurisdiction within FPL service territory.
Okay.
Ms. Green?
No.
Revenue bill. I had one question going back to the beginning of the presentation and cash on hand and liquidity. Significant drop that wasn't addressed from 17. Is that a timing issue? It was on your slide too.
It's not a timing issue. Some of this was by design. There's two things that are going on there. One is a pretty significant drop in our fuel fund balance. And we, with the board's approval, decided about a year and a half ago to lower our fuel rate and bleed down the balance that way rather than offering the one-time refunds that we had done for the prior couple of years. So that's driving some of that decrease in liquidity. The remainder is the capital fund. So we had built up a balance in the capital fund, and that's being spent down as our capital projects and capital spend rate has increased.
Okay, thank you. And then the $40 million CapEx transfer, your footnote 4 on slide 4. Did I hear you say that that's really sort of a prepayment for the next 3 years until COD? Are we still 3 years out on COD there?
That's correct. Yeah, the currently scheduled commercial operation dates for units 3 and 4 of Plant Vogtle are 2021 and 2022, and this is a stabilization fund that was established to allow for the advance payment of some of those debt service, primarily debt service related expenses before COD.
Okay, so we wouldn't expect to see similar contributions to the rate stabilization in the next 2 years?
Notwithstanding a change in the schedule, that's correct.
I won't hold you to that. Okay. Anything else from Ms. Dykes? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Carrie Stewart, item 3B2, outage communications update. Ms. Stewart.
I brought my posse with me today.
Oh, yeah. Reinforcements.
Yes.
Team effort.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and board members. Mike, Paul, and I are here today to give you an update on our outage communication strategy going into the hurricane season. As I'm sure you all know, the entire company is working on an action item list, an after action item list of over 140 action items related to Hurricane Irma and ways that we could perform better going into the hurricane season. But Mike, Paul, and I are here today to address how we're going to come together as our three teams to address customer expectations in the event for the next severe storm to hit our area. We'd like to start today by addressing a question posed by Board Member Kessler in a previous meeting about our learnings from other utilities. What the slide will show you is our direct interaction and/or visits to these other sites around the country to talk about things like the deployment, configuration, and use of two-way smart meters, the use of apps and maps and websites and mobile devices, communication successes and failures, and what all of us are doing to get better at those and to address the successes as well. What's not on the slide in terms of cities or groups that we're members of, but should be noted, is that we are members of the Florida Coordinating Group, which is a group of utilities. It's made up of IOUs, munis, and co-ops. Paul McElroy is currently the chair of this group, and their major initiative this year was storm prep. And that includes mutual aid, lessons learned, sharing best practices. And we also recently participated in a post-storm discussion with other utilities from around the country, but more specifically from Houston and cities all over Florida, to talk about our learnings from Hurricanes Matthew, Harvey, and Irma. J.D. Powers facilitated that discussion a few weeks ago in Miami. So what we discovered is that while many of these utilities did deploy and use a lot more technology than we did, especially during Irma, we performed as good or better than many of the IOUs during Irma. But we also learned how to get better as an industry. You'll remember that Mike Brost shared with you during the last month's meeting of what we are doing here at JEA to reduce outages. And Brian Roche is going to speak to you later this afternoon about water and wastewater resiliency. So we're going to go into today talking about how we improve communications during these severe weather events.
As Carrie indicated, we learned from the other utilities whom we talked to that while JEA may not have had all the same technology installed as some of the larger utilities, we did perform equally well or better recovering our customers within a week's time and providing comparable, albeit not perfect, customer communications. The question you're probably asking, therefore, is why does it take all the utilities, including JEA, so long to recover everybody and to provide accurate information in the aftermath of a major storm? So this chart on the board here is an attempt to answer that question is the process of identifying all customers who are out of service, assessing the damage, organizing and scheduling work, and reporting status is a complex process on a normal day, but it's incredibly more difficult when 60% or more of the customer base is out of service, as it was for every Florida utility during Irma. So as the chart shows, we get notified of outages from three different sources of information. Traditionally, the utilities relied only on two sources: the customer calling us to tell us that they are out, and our own SCADA technology that tracks outages at the system or circuit level of detail. Now, the larger utilities we spoke to had already started to also use their meters to provide a third source of information. These newer two-way smart meters have the ability to tell us when they're out, but they also give a fair amount of false information. We recently developed a filter program that can detect these anomalies. And just this month, we put in place the ability to receive outage information from our two-way meters as well. So far that process is working quite well for the majority of our customers who have the two-way meters. Now, as we work through a storm and we gather information from these three sources about the outages, we must first organize and verify the data and group it into logical work groups. And we do that first by our circuits and eventually by our laterals or our individual customers. Now, the outage management system does this by knowing the relationship between the customers, their locations, and the circuits, laterals, and transformers that feed them. JEA has 464,000 customers, 350 circuits,
and hundreds of thousands of lateral connections, relays, and transformers. So it's a very complex GIS connectivity model that's required to actually perform the analysis and make this all work. So often we can repair a circuit or a feeder, but if a downstream transformer or a lateral cable is also down, we'll not have actually restored all the customers on that circuit, and therefore the information system needs to know that to be smart enough to report it correctly. So the logical grouping of outage data, when organized and validated, is then sent to the computer-aided dispatch system where the work is assigned to the crews. This system also feeds the outage map, the information systems that are used by the customer call takers, the interactive voice response or IVR system, and our website, JEA.com. The work crews need to report back on a timely basis the status of their work, and the system needs to determine exactly which customers have been restored. We're also working on a new way to ping the meters to improve this confirmation process, and we expect to have that implemented prior to the storm season. Last point, timing of the data transfers across all these systems is very critical, as delays of information can, in fact, be very disruptive. Because so many people are involved in this process, the system's performance is critical. Our information systems were not impacted by the storm. JEA.com runs on a fully redundant platform, and even the other systems performed flawlessly during the storm. The improvements we need to make are with the data that goes into the systems.
Thank you, Mr. Cosgrove.
So as Kerry indicated, we, following both storms and just in the history of JEA continuous improvement, we identified a number of after-action item reports and opportunities for improvement, and we have implemented quite a bit of changes and improvements. A strong subset of those fit into the category of customer outage communication. So this we've identified for this presentation several specific opportunity areas. As Paul indicated, our outage processes and systems are fairly complex, and they work really well for normal storms and normal days. But when we get into a 50-60% customer outage situation, major hurricane, we deploy an entirely different set of processes and systems. Those have been developed over the years, and we continue to refine and improve them. So several specific examples here. The first one involves our damage assessment, which we go out and do in the first 24 to 48 hours. We've implemented some improvements where we are bringing back additional data points that will aid our ability to communicate effectively with customers. We have implemented changes in our ticket management processes. That's critical because the outage management system uses outage tickets, and the outage tickets feed JEA.com and the customer communication. So it's critical that those tickets be accurate and timely and in sync with what's going on in the field, not just in the first couple of days, but throughout the restoration. We've also done some work at ensuring that every JEA employee is utilized in a great sky capacity in support of damage assessment, restoration, ensuring quality communication with our customers. And the second area, Paul alluded to this. Historically, utilities depended on customers to call to tell us they're in or out. It's a complicated distribution system, depending on where the problem is. Sometimes we know about it, but in many cases we don't know about it, and we rely on customers to call us. JEA put in a first-generation smart meter system back in the 90s. We were among the early adopters. It used a one-directional, one-way communication system and was not very reliable and robust at giving us information on outage status. It did fine with consumption, which is what it was primarily intended to do, the monthly kilowatt-hour consumption, but it wasn't reliable for outage communication. We have, over the last 5 or 6 years, upgraded our network, mesh network, to be a two-way, much more robust communication system, and we're putting in what amounts to second-generation meters that do a whole lot more than just tell us about consumption. They can also reliably tell us whether the power's on or off. And as Paul indicated, we had turned that on February 1st, this month for the first time, and we are at a 51% penetration rate in terms of changing out the old meters with the new meters. We will continue to pursue that. That and that alone has brought about significant improvements in our ability to handle outages on a regular day like today for a normal storm, and we're optimistic that it'll help us for the next major event we have here in town.
So in addition to implementing the smart two-way meters for all our customers, we're taking a number of other actions to improve the accuracy of the data that's reported. First, as you can tell by having the three of us giving this report, to be successful with outage management communication takes a real team effort to gather the outage data, operate the information flow, perform the repair work, communicate with customers, media, and other interested entities. We recognize that our processes and systems involved in the handoffs of the information can be improved, and we're working on this with a cross-functional task force that is dedicated to making critical changes. Secondly, we're going to double down this year on the training that we provide all our staff prior to the storm season, with greater emphasis on the systems correctly and reporting information more accurately. Third, we're enhancing our IVR system so that customers can actually help us better understand if they have been restored or not. Since increasingly more customers are contacting us via their mobile devices, which can stay powered during a storm, communicating with affected customers either via the phone or through the website has become their primary communications channel. So our website is now fully functional on mobile devices, and that's a primarily communication vehicle that was used during Irma. And then last thing, speaking of our website, during a storm, we tend to make the storm-related information, more accessible with simplified access to that data. Smartphone access has become incredibly important and is now often the primary source, so we want to make sure that data is readily available to the customers.
And that's when the handoff comes to the communications team. After we receive the information, we have been working to improve customer and stakeholder communications during all phases of the storm. Sort of the mass communications that we need to put out to the media and other entities in the area, all the way down to individual outages and how we interact and communicate with individual customers. We're breaking this out into 3 phases, and we'll have specific communications for each of these phases to make it easier to deploy once we reach each phase. The first phase is anywhere from 48 to 72 hours after a severe storm. Think Cat 3, maybe small Cat 4. Cat 5, sort of all bets are off in terms of the time frames on this. But the first 48 to 72 hours, the company is assessing and restoring critical portions of the grid and restoring priority customers. We're also still in an assessment mode, so we want to make it very clear to customers their priority, what the priorities are as we move into phase 2, which is spent repairing these circuits and remaining outages on these circuits that haven't yet been identified or repaired. Phase 3, we move into those critical and sometimes really awful hours for those customers that are still out of power, and these remaining hours are spent assessing and restoring those unique one-off situations that are really frustrating for our crews and the customers, but identifying those that are a result of fuses being blown, breakers being off, or just additional repairs needing to be done on the street. And again, these time frames are for a severe storm, think Cat 3, lower Cat 4. We will work on a different communication strategies if it is something that is catastrophic, Cat 5 direct hit.
Now we turn to our outage map. So in order to improve the accuracy of individual outage identification, we need to address the accuracy of our outage map, which is heavily relied upon by individuals and the media, as well as taking advantage of the improvements that we've already made with our mobile website. So first off, in the early phases of the storm, when we're focused at restoring at the circuit, not the individual level other than identified health and safety priorities, we need to change our presentation on the map to indicate that level of recovery. One way to do that is to represent in some fashion the circuits on the map and show percentage completions at that level of detail. If we can show customers which circuit they're part of, something we actually have a difficulty doing, then we can give them a better sense of how close we are to recovering their entire neighborhood. Then in the later stages of recovery, we can switch to more direct information about the specific outage, particularly if it might be a transformer or a cable that is down in front of their house, especially if they've already called in to report it. And then finally, by having JEA.com capabilities now fully deployed on these mobile devices, a change we implemented last year, we can provide much more accurate data. Whether we call out to the customer, send an email, direct them to the map, or just send a brief text message, now we can better communicate directly with the customer who may have no power in their home and hence no fixed communication capability. But they can communicate if they simply have a way to keep their phone charged. So part of our pre-storm communication with the customers will be to advise them how to prepare for the storm both digitally and traditionally, and let them know what they need to do to fully prepare.
And that was a perfect lead-in to what we need to do to continue to engage and educate our customers and to make sure that we are setting their expectations appropriately. We are improving our communication plan. We're honing the message, the timing, the delivery process, and even some of the words that we have used in past storms to ensure that the right message gets to the right customer at the right time. We are also in the process of creating a comprehensive customer guide to explain the restoration process, to educate customers what to do to prepare and how to best communicate with us after the storm. And like we have done in years past, but we are revamping it, we'll be starting our mid-year campaign to drive customers to update their cell phone numbers, their preferred channel to be communicated with during a storm or blue sky, and to download our restoration guide. So through the end of February and all of March, our black belts here in the company will have completed the process mapping for the current and future states for this communication planning for severe outages. From April 30th to June 30th, we will refine our communications processes, and as these gentlemen have alluded to, lots and lots of training to make sure everyone is on the same page. And on that final note, just a friendly reminder, hurricane season is just over 100 days away.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Sunshine. Well, Ms. Stewart, Mr. Cosgrave, Mr. Brost, I appreciate you being here. Someone a lot smarter than me said failure's not the mistake, it's not learning from your mistakes. And we made some mistakes during our last storm season. And I appreciate the dedication of each of you and your staffs to address those mistakes, primarily in communication. But as I learned when I first joined this board, much to my surprise, you don't know when my power's out. And so I guess it was over a year ago we heard about the launch of the smart meter, the new second generation smart meter program that will allow JEA to know when the power's out at my home and our other ratepayers' homes. So that's encouraging. I appreciate the additional training. I appreciate all the work that's going on behind the scenes. I think that we are going to be much better prepared next time, and there will be a next time we have a major storm event with outage. So thank you for that. Others, Mr. Cumber?
Mr. Bruce, you mentioned that 51% of the homes have smart meters. Is
the second generation?
The second generation.
Two-way, correct.
Is further penetration due to funding not being available to do it on a more quicker timeline, or hardware not being available? Because I assume as we get higher penetration, our system becomes that much more resilient.
Correct. It's about a $50 million investment. It's just a matter of it's funded. It's fully funded. It's taken us time. We didn't come in and do 100% in 1 year. It's simply the plan was to put it in over a number of years.
Is there an option to speeding that up at this point?
We can look at that. We actually have accelerated it in recent months. We've talked off and on, you recall, about the demand rate, and that's a requirement to have 100% of two-way meters. That's a couple years off, so we were timing the deployment of the two-way meters to really support that project. It has the added benefit of this outage communication, and we could certainly look at accelerating it. It's being managed out of Cary's area.
And we did ask for and receive through our capital planning group an acceleration of the program to get the meters installed by no later than 2020, fiscal year 2020. They were projected to take a couple of years longer. So as recently as January, we have asked for and have been given permission to accelerate that. So we're working with our meter partners because now we have to order and then take delivery of them. We are looking at how we reconfigure some of our work areas in different parts of town to retrain certain employees to deploy them so that we can accelerate this process of getting them out by 2020.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if there's an opportunity to look at it, you know, and if it requires a board discussion on funding, it might be worth at least having that discussion to see whether or not adding additional capital dollars to get, the rollout more, done more quickly. And then my second question is, I know I assume blue sky means normal day.
Yes.
Okay. I know we had a conversation before just on being able to reach out to customers that our systems were not built in a way where we could geofence a certain community that, has a sewer line that's broken or some other situation. As part of us putting this communications plan in place and the IT systems behind it, would we now be able to geofence certain communities so we can proactively, reach out? Because I think Paul and I had a conversation, and we had the system where we can contact every one of our customers, or we can contact nobody, but we can't contact a subset of our customers.
Brian's going to talk a little bit about that in his presentation that follows right after this. But we are doing some of that since you raised it previously. It still is a fairly manual process for us to do that. So we're still somewhat limited. We're trying to obviously automate that whole process, but we're starting to do exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, great, thank you.
Ms. Flanagan.
Thank you for the presentation, very educational. There was a reference on slide 7 during phase 1 to the first 48 and 72 hours spent restoring critical portions of the grid and priority customers. My assumption is that priority customers is a reference to hospitals, schools, nursing homes, those sort of things. But could you help describe for everyone else here what would fall into that category?
Yes, yeah, you're correct. Generally speaking, it's public safety. So it's JSO, JFRD, it's the hospitals, it's the military bases, shelters for the community. Those tend to be in that list. Large hospital and nursing homes would fall into that category. We also prioritize some of our critical electric and water sewer facilities, lift stations, and critical, the power plants, and getting our control center back up and running from the electric perspective. Does that help?
Thank you.
Sure.
Schools follow, right?
Yeah, and kind of as a second trench, we in the second day we begin to work on schools. We put a lot of emphasis on getting 100% of the schools back on at day 2, day 3. Duval County School Board can't declare school back up and running with 80% of the schools back. So we work really hard and have some really good communication and coordination with our counterparts at the Duval County School Board to get 100% of the schools back up. And we bring along with that the private schools as well. And of course, we have schools in Orange Park and Nassau County and St. Johns County as well. So the schools are a focus, absolutely.
Yeah. Reverend Newbill.
Now, how far down has that information been communicated, especially to the average customer? So I don't, when my lights go out during a storm, then I already anticipate that there are people ahead of me that has to be taken care of first that are critical. It might calm me down just a little bit.
Yes, sir. We try to get the word out every year.
I would say that typically we try to get the word out, and people don't normally start to listen until Paul is communicating it in a yellow rain slicker. But that is part of our strategy. Again, if you go back to page 7, is to set customers' expectations appropriately and to have that information front and center on the page next to the map. We know where they go for information during a storm, so we want to put this type of education where they're already going. We don't want to have it buried. We don't want to have to say it and miss people. For people who are looking for that prioritization list, it will be up front and center where they're already going, which is the outage map.
Good. Thank you.
Ms. Green.
I also didn't know that we didn't know when our lights were out as well. So as we moved into this age of technology, there's a lot of fiber out in our community, from telecommunication to cable, everything, but there's new developments are literally building new construction homes with fiber already in them. Is there an opportunity there to utilize the fiber to speed up our communication?
We own 600 miles of it ourselves. And we do use it all. I mentioned SCADA technology. Our SCADA technology is all driven by a fiber network throughout the city. All our substations are connected. We're moving to connect a lot more of the lift stations. Brian will talk about that later as well. Yes, we heavily use the fiber.
But the smart meters are radio, right, with receivers and relay stations?
Correct.
And it's fully deployed. The radio system's in place. What's going to take the next 24 months or so is the actual meter replacement. So we have a fully deployed, system-wide, modern, second-generation two-way radio system. So the radio system, communication system's not the holdup. It's the physical task of going out to 250,000 meters and changing out the meter.
Mr. McElroy?
I would say that some utilities have chosen to collect that information via cell and via fiber. Most are the radio frequency set up a sort of a mesh cell network that we own and partner with our outsource partner to do that. And that's sort of the common industry standard. Some have relied on cell, and we're watching that closely, but the reliability there, it's sort of the same thing as having electricity to the home. If the lines get knocked down due to wind, your backbone of communication goes down as well.
Including fiber.
Including fiber, yeah.
Yep. Anyone else? Well, I appreciate you working hard to strengthen our data collection systems so that we can more effectively manage the outage and repairs. I'm reminded of the mantra, garbage in, garbage out. I appreciate your taking steps to make sure we're reducing the amount of garbage in. Thank you.
And we'll work on the garbage out.
Thanks. Brian Roche, item 3B3 on your agenda. Framework to resiliency update. Well, Ms. Dykes told us you were getting another $40 million. What are you going to do with that?
I think it's 60 plus 40 maybe.
Okay,
So it's maybe just 60 baseline plus 40. So we're doing a lot with it, and we're going to make JEA more resilient and we're a leader in the industry. So we're here today is on the initiative that was established in October 2016 after Hurricane Matthew. Actually, got to think about what hurricane names nowadays, right? And this is the fifth presentation, and more important, the fifth step in our process. And we, had discussions back. A couple of new board members we had in November. And gray shows the meetings we had before. It's really not meant to read this slide, but we had checkpoint milestones in November after the first hurricane. Did an update in February last year. April was a large one. We did analyze what we're going to do prior to the next storm season. We didn't know we were going to have another hurricane, but we prepared. And then we had the System Capacity Management Operation and Maintenance CMOM assessment. It was complete in September. We had to wait until October to present because we had the hurricane again in September. And then here we are today in the February 2018 milestone. In addition, we've done ongoing communications and work with the regulatory authorities. I think on the communications, to offset real quick from the ad hoc from the previous presentation, the enhancement to send auto texts and calls has been done. It's basically a very manual process, create a flat file, the geo shape that you mentioned, Mr. Cumber, and then we send those out, and those are an enhancement to the additional type of communications, SSOs. The two-way meter and electric will not help directly for that element. What it will do is give us definitive answers. Do we have electricity to our 1,400 pump stations? Do we have electricity to our water plants and our sewer plants? So it does help us in that aspect for definitive, and we accelerated the priority to put it on the two-way second-generation meters at our water wastewater facilities. So today is really moving down to the bottom. The system resilience assessment is more along with the mid-range defensive actions and the long-term standards. So today's kind of an inflection point with our overall plan. First, next two slides highlight the initial focus we had on JEA sewer pump stations. At the bottom, I used to say we were near the most, but JEA has 1,396 pump stations, the most of any wastewater utility in the country. And one director reminded me on Thursday, Friday, we now have 1,400 from the time this was printed and the time we update our assets. So what we have in the first column, the stacked column, is prior to Hurricane Irma. At the time we had, you can't read the number in the purple, I apologize, but it's 245 fixed generators or diesel pumps at our 14, or at the time was 1,375 pump stations. We had 70 portable. So it was 23% of the pump stations that we had were covered by backup generation sources. And that is standard. Actually, maybe a little bit higher standard. Most standards are probably 15 to 20%, maybe some at 10 across Florida. We are aware of one small utility, about 100 units and one about close to 500, about a third our size, that has full backup power. So all our scanning we've done, that's what we've seen. 2 utilities, one 1/10 and one 1/3 our size, have 100% backup power. And we'll continue to do benchmarks on their slide. I'll talk about that. And what we did prior to Hurricane Matthews, the second slide, we worked on the green, was the 100 rentals was a great idea. The board and Mr. Hightower from the insurance background suggested that. It worked out great. We were 35% coverage before last hurricane. This year we'll be at 47% coverage. So we plan on, over the 5-year period, get up to 800 fixed generators, 250 portable generators through lease, or we own our own portable, which is about 71% coverage on our generators. And then we'll look at that point where we go. We won't spend much time on this graphical because we can spend a lot of time on it, but really the highlight of this graphical splits that generator and pump station flows in quartiles. The ones on the right are our highest flow pump stations. The 350 on the right, the highest pump stations. They are anywhere from about 70,000 gallons a day on. And then the second quartile is our next one, and the left half is our smaller pump stations. The blue dotted line, the bottom becomes more solid. Those represent graphically where we have generators. So you would think on the left, the first half on the left, the smaller ones, is not where we need them the most. So we do have some scatter. We originally had 7 prior to the hurricane season, the lowest flow station. Now we have 20. When we build new pump stations, they get generators under new standards. But the ones on the far right, of the 151 largest, we have 151 generators. There's one on city property that we can't get a physical one located in a nice park, so we put a portable one prior to the storms. So this is what this shows. And in yellow also shows what's new from the 16 months ago. We have 162 new fixed generators, 12 portable generators, and 100 that we know we can lease generators, and we're putting a bid out as we speak on 50 diesel pumps to supplement and utilize different staff to help us to use portable pumps during the storm. So we're looking at creative ways to be able to use all our resources, people and tools. The next slide, we'll start at the bottom first. I put the text box at the top. We have $100 million in direct resiliency. Work is projected in a 5-year capital plan. We have also have enhanced resiliency standards in numerous ongoing projects as we build and as we design. If we can enhance things we learned from last year, half in ongoing construction projects that we added that. We also have $1.5 million not included in this slide. That's our O&M budget for the annual basis for the 6-month lease agreements that we are working on. And this splits the type. The top 4 rows are generators or diesel pumps, about $60 million over the next 5 years. And then we're moving more towards electrical upgrades, fortify elevate equipment, more serious long-term design challenges, and that will take some time. And that as the years go out, we'll spend more money in those elements and keep the generator program going, but we'll keep on balancing more with the long-term design changes. Look at our water treatment facilities and also some program management, engineering services and fees. The next 4 slides go into our next step, resiliency assessment, what we're doing. We're first going to look at our extreme weather scenarios, ABC across the industry. When you look at this, is first rainfall and flooding. For example, we had 32 inches of rainfall in the 4th quarter of FY17. The second one is hurricane storage. Do we look at 100-year floods plus 1 foot, plus 5 foot? Do you look at 500-year flood levels plus 1 foot? Some places are using 2 meters, usually the ones in Europe. And look at sea level rise for potential climate impacts. So we'll look at those scenarios. We're not going to define that we're saying these scenarios are going to happen, but we're going to look at them. The next slide, we'll talk how we're going to overlay it. The bottom left is New York City's wastewater resiliency plan. It's when we're done over 18 months from now with this plan, we'll have a glossy document to help us to work with other infrastructure, industries, and communities. And on the right leads up to the next slide. We're starting to work more on our plants than just the pump stations. And we did a lot of work on our plants last year, but the assessment really is going to look at plants. This is Buckman, wastewater treatment. The bottoms are clarifiers, and off the page to the bottom would be Tyrant Avenue and the river. So wastewater plants were built for the water to start at the top of the plant and go downhill 10 or 15 feet through a hydraulic profile to low-lying areas. And that's the challenge you have on wastewater plants throughout the country, whether in Seattle, New York, Boston, DC, or Jacksonville, or Miami. The assessment approach, we mentioned the extreme weather scenarios. We'll model it. We'll identify at-risk systems, facilities, and equipment. And I say systems because the wastewater system, it's a system. You can't just look at a pump. You got to look at the pumps, the pipes, the downstream systems, and what have you. Quantification of risk with costs. and we'll prioritize the mitigation requirements and investments that we're looking at making. We'll have to make some decisions on what do you protect early on and what do you look at that's be more second generational. And I mean generation of us, 20, 30 years, some things might need to be changed and some will be more in the next several years. We'll look at preventive strategies, protective strategies, and new standards. The example on the right is a schematic of the Buttman plant. And the bottom right-hand side, the sea level rise at Hurricane Irma was 7 feet sea level or the river height. Our electrical equipment on Tyrant Avenue was at 10 feet. So 3 more feet of river rise would impact our electrical equipment. So we'll look at what do we do. Do we have some generators on site to help move the flow at partially treated sewage or wastewater? Yes. We would not treat the water the way it needed to be. And as you go up the plant, you see the plant's up at 21 feet. So depending on what level of storm surge and the weather scenarios that we look at, that will change over time, it impacts different equipment at plants. So we'll look at all our major facilities.
I mean, I think that points out the challenge that we have, but I mean the industry has. When you look at that schematic and you look at the electric system sitting on the water's edge of the river, no one was thinking of storm surge, no one was thinking of sea level change when that was designed. It was, the best we can figure out, it was put there because it had its closest proximity to the connection point on Talleyrand for electric service. Okay. And so when you're thinking about infrastructure that was designed and put in service 50 and 60 years ago, it was really a different mindset and a different approach. So when we look at the $3 to $4 billion of assets, original cost assets we have in the ground today, covering the full service territory, many of those, or much of that, was really designed with a different mindset. So going forward in terms of resiliency, just simple things like that, moving the electric system up, building some walls around those last clarifiers will give us at least the first big step into being more resilient for this main facility. But this needs to be looked at. We've got 1,400 pump stations and you got all the facilities, so it's not just dozens of times, but it's almost 100 times over.
Thanks, Paul. That's a good point. The engineering scope of service will have program management and quality assurance to involve all our efforts. The assessment we just talked about. We're going to enhance design and construction standards. For example, interstate crossings. Sounds great. You build a new wastewater plant. 30, 40 years ago, let's get the pipe across the interstate. What happens when that pipe breaks? It's going to take you a month to put another pipe underneath the interstate. So now, if you want to go underneath the interstate, we go twice. So at least you'll have a backup source. It doesn't solve it, but at least you have a backup source. Engineering design services, the two I'll highlight is the bottom 2 boxes, electrical instrumentation controls, which is the text box there, ensure synchronization and transfer of switches, generators, VFDs, variable frequency drives, relays, and other electronics such as backup power systems operate as designed when primary power supply fails. The reason I say this is because the industry has not got here yet. Not an engineering firm, no one in the industry is consistently designing it from plant to plant, city to city, equipment to equipment manufacturer, and this is something that we are pushing with our consultants in industry to get this consistent, so at least at our facilities and elsewhere. And we'll integrate with JEA's capital plan. We embarked on a $100 million large diameter pipe replacement program to make us more resilient, because we do have the most pump stations. We have 4,600 miles of, or 4,000 miles of sewer pipes. And therefore, we're a very complex system. So we embarked on that. We'll integrate things we learned from here with that program, our overall $1 billion 5-year capital program, and we went to the board in August on our water supply sustainability program. So all those things will be integrated to make sure if there's any new standards into those programs. And we'll do benchmark assessments and publications. And the benchmark, we got 2 more slides. When you read about it, and it's a very interesting subject, it's just so serious, the resiliency, when you read about it, we're going to benchmark first with Florida and national utilities. But you see a lot on sewer stormwater, combined sewer overflows, and that's New York City DEP, which is both wastewater and stormwater, and DC Water. There's a lot of, they're kind of the marquee programs, but they are combined sewer overflows. When it rains, like I might quote a little bit wrong, but I think $2 billion DC's putting in their big tunneling system. That's to get from 96% of the time when it rains, they're concerned where they won't overflow, to 98%. So they know even spending $2 billion, 98% of the time when it rains, it will protect it, but then 2% of the times it won't. So those are more different. There's 700 cities in America that have combined sanitary sewer and stormwater. So when you read about it, there's a little different animal than we have here because we have separate systems, and we're better off for that, on that. And then cities, you'll see a lot of studies going on. Not much true actions and investments in the ground yet, but a lot of studies, a lot of designs. City of Miami's got some great plans. The city of Boston, the reason I put the picture on the right, Boston's looking at the same thing in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. I mean, the Netherlands, of course, is the leader in protecting them. They're underwater, protected from the sea. But Boston's looking at something very similar to the picture we have in here for Rotterdam to protect their harbor. But that's more the city and the harbor, not necessarily the wastewater utility. So when we're on the path to be the lead in industry within several years, we'll be on this list of benchmark utilities. In this slide, we showed the September board presentation, a great slide. This is a Hurricane Irma 118th pump station, where we looked at that electrical equipment. That's the transformers underwater. If the yellow line, the water rise as high as that yellow line, we would have potentially had catastrophic damage to that pump station electrical controls. So therefore, we had the gentleman on the boat to go around the back to say, hey, can we turned the power off. We had a backup generator. We're going to turn off the whole electrical backup supply. And we were watching to make sure that had 3 or 4 inches left, and we kept it right underneath that yellow line. Fortunately, the river subsided, and we're not able to, we were able to keep that pump station running during Hurricane Irma. We are looking at a progressive design build project to rebuild that station. It would take at least 18 to 30 months for us to try to get the plans in place prior to those hurricane seasons, not this hurricane season. In the meantime, we'll have mitigation plans to minimize any impacts. But it will take time to change because this is the requirements by the industry, what Paul mentioned. This is the way it's been designed for generations throughout the country, and it will take time to change, and we'll continue to work aggressively to do that. Our milestones in gray we did, and today is the system resiliency assessment, more on mid-range, long-term, and we'll periodically update the board and stakeholders. We're going to waterways commissions next month, and we continue to get invited to other places. Any questions? It's been a long 15 months.
Thank you, Brian. That's very informative, very helpful. Just a reminder, the framework to resiliency followed Hurricane Matthew, where we had a number of SSOs, a number of pump outages, and I think it was the former Director Burr's request and directive that staff undertook what has now been labeled as the framework to resiliency. A lot of hard work. I think it paid off with a lot lower impact through the 17 storm season, but still work to be done. I would suggest that you include in your scope of services a no-wake zone for the 118th Street pump station.
We need it because we were close.
Yeah.
And
any comments or questions for Mr. Roche? Kelly?
Sure. Brian, I think you did a great job. And on slide 4, the pump station backup power systems, that graph did a really good job of explaining for me how you're tackling those most valuable pumps with backup redundancy first. I'd be interested to see what that proportion of volume coverage has been through over time, by year perhaps. So I think you would see an even higher coverage rate than just looking at the literal number of pump stations that have redundancy.
I think understand I need to combine the two here in a sense in a different type of graph. When we get to 800 fixed ones, it'll probably be 95% of the flow. I think that's what you're saying. And that was my boss's slide. We just produced it, so it's good. Thank you. Got to give credit where it's due.
Thank you, Brian. Reverend Newbill.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Green? Yeah.
All right, thank you, Ms. Green.
On his way back, don't leave yet. Any questions for Mr. Roche? Mr. Cumber?
Good, thank you.
Okay. All right. Brian, thank you for that update, and keep up the good work.
All right, team's doing a great job.
Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 3C, open discussion. I'd just like to lead off. Some of the friends from the press are here. JEA has certainly been in the press a lot in the last several weeks. I've been quoted in the press far more than I would like to have been, but I would like to just extend to my fellow board members my apologies if any actions on my behalf have reflected poorly on the board. It's intended to be no reflection on each of you. I thank you for each of you and the work that you put in service to JEA. So thank you very much for that. I'd like to lead the open discussion with the suggestion that came from Mr. Schellenberg with a suggestion for a workshop, and just ask if people would share their thoughts on a workshop to discuss privatization at the JEA board level. Ms. Green?
I would be open to a workshop, but I think that we also need the information so that we have a viable conversation. I think that our executive team should continue down that road of compiling the information, also working with the vendor that we have that's working with us, but that when we come together in the workshop that we have viable information today so that we can have a productive conversation.
Thank you. Reverend Newbill?
I think it's a good idea. I was saying to myself, what did I miss? Because from all of the communications back and forth, it appears that we had gone through so much more than we actually went through. The first time first time I heard anything about it was on Mr. Petway's last meeting. And he didn't say sell it, he didn't say don't sell it. He made a suggestion, that we look into it. And I think anytime you have an asset that has gone through as much as JEA has gone through, when nobody wanted to buy it at one time, when it was head over heels in debt, and now, it's like a home. If I have a home and I paid $1 million for it and somebody offered me $100 million, I'm gonna look at it, even if I don't sell it. And I think that's where we are, and that's the communications that I think has got mixed up. That there is no sell it now, don't sell it now. We're exploring, and yeah, I think a workshop would help us. It would help me. And I don't think you said anything reflective, at least on my part, in a negative way. I think you've done an excellent job in communicating, where we are and what we're looking at.
Thank you, Reverend Newbill. Ms. Flanagan?
I echo Mr. Reverend Newbill's sentiments. I was proud to be a member of this board serving with you, and I thought that you and Paul and Mr. Mace did an excellent job at the City Council hearing, presenting in a fair and unbiased manner the results of an initial evaluation that's been completed. And I don't think that anyone has taken, I don't think that anyone on our board or from management's perspective has taken a position that we're any further in the process than that. And I think that a workshop is a great idea for a sound next step.
Thank you. Any thoughts, Mr. Cumber?
So I was sad Wednesday morning when I couldn't reschedule my day to be with you. By the end of the day, I was happy I could reschedule my calendar. So I'll start with that. Yes, so I think a workshop would be very, very useful. I also think that, prior to that workshop, and maybe it's today in this open discussion, just the role of the board would be a helpful conversation, in the sense that I think Mr. Newbill kind of hit it right, which is a suggestion was made at the end of November. I think our next board meeting was December. By the time we sat here as a board in December, a letter had already been sent by you to Paul, and kind of a process had started. I was probably a little naive that we would have a little bit of a conversation as a board before this kind of exploded out there. And even just on a scope of work, and I think this is where, Board Member Green was going, is there are so many policy issues that we as a board, I think, need to wrestle with. So when the City Council decides whether or not they want to move forward in a partnership with us or not move forward, that the facts are laid on the table, right? And so I think PFM is but a small component of the information we need. So mean, for me, there was like a simple kind of high-level question, which is, we pay $116 million to the city council every year. And if this board was faced with the decision on whether or not to vote on making that $116 million permanent in perpetuity, would we as a board vote that way? Ironically, if you were to bond that $116 million, you get a number that comes pretty close to the net number that PFM put in front. My assumption is this board would take a lot of time to decide whether or not we would be willing to commit in perpetuity that $116 million. And Paul and I have had several kind of just, spitball conversations about it. And, at the end, we don't know what the utility industry is going to look like 5 years from now, 20 years from now. So would you commit to a revenue stream where there's so much uncertainty, right? So for the first time, a monopoly, I believe, is on the verge of potentially being, not being a monopoly anymore. And so, the moment that you have batteries where you can store power, your largest customers are going to start disconnecting from the grid. And once your largest customers start disconnecting from the grid, what does that leave you with? Right? Those are the policy issues that PFM is not going to help us walk through, but those are real policy issues I think we as a board need to kind of roll up our sleeves and understand. And once we get comfortable of what the utility industry is going to look like, then it allows us to kind of take a step back and say, well, when a monopoly is threatened, that's usually when you decide to sell, right? I'd venture to say if Ms. Flanagan's league tomorrow announced that they would have 200 more teams join, there'd be a conversation as to whether or not the value of that team is the same. And if tomorrow people can serve customers, kind of, I'm going to use the phrase over the top, what's the value of the utility? So I think a workshop, Mr. Chair, is important, but I think before we rush into that workshop, I think we need to define the work product we need in order to go into that workshop and have a discussion that is based on fact and not rhetoric and not opinion and definitely not politics. So I'll leave it at that right now.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber. Anyone else? Well, I take it that the consensus of the board is then that we have a workshop, and that in advance of that, we give some thought to what the parameters of that discussion would be. So I'll work with Mr. McElroy to get that scheduled. I don't believe we need a motion to schedule that workshop, so we'll just work with the calendars to find an opportunity. I'd be remiss if I didn't note for the record that this morning, City Council President Brochet issued a memorandum appointing a special committee to study the potential sale of JEA, and appointed council members Creshenbenny, Beckton, Brochet, Dennis, and Morgan to that committee, asking for regular updates and at least a status update by the June 26, 18 meeting of City Council. So I would anticipate that this board, in workshop and otherwise, would work closely with and respond to any questions that came from City Council as we move this discussion forward. So we'll work on that workshop and the parameters for that. Other open discussion items. Mr. Cumber?
Just going back to the workshop, though, is how do we get to the point of identifying the information that this board will need ahead of that workshop and making sure that the right firms come on board to produce that work product?
I would ask that each board member give some individual thought to their thoughts on that subject and feed them back to Mr. McElroy so that he can collate those and help us work together to establish a framework for that workshop.
Thank you.
Any other open discussion? Ms. Green?
Chairman, I in response to Reverend Newbill, that we kind of got rubber band shot down this road faster than we probably anticipated. But I think that we should take into consideration that we have started, or this process has started, a scare amongst the ratepayers as well as the employees. So maybe we should put some thought to how to communicate and put them at ease that a decision has not been made, that this is just a phase of discovery.
I think that's the first step, to continue repeating it. I appreciate you making note of that. There has been no discussion, or no decision rather, just a discussion. So hopefully we can repeat that often and give those assurances. Mr. McElroy, anything to contribute to the idea of a workshop? Are you willing to serve as that point person for collecting thoughts on parameters?
Gladly. I think that if we look back on the record, that was sort of a path that we had at least scheduled out in our thinking, and I think it would be an outstanding way to communicate together, to work through the issues together, and to really chart the path forward together. And so I'm encouraged by that thought.
Thank you very much. Okay, if there's no other discussion items, we'll move on to other.
Just one other, Mr.
Sorry.
Chairman. So Plant Vogel, I know we've had some conversations, and I think several meetings ago, we had talked about potentially getting a pretty in-depth presentation on that. But I know then we kind of got blindsided with the privatization. I would like to put that back on the table and see if in the next meeting, latest at 2, just because this is going to be a big part of the privatization discussion, that that management comes and walks us through kind of where things stand, what the financial impacts are, when key decisions will be made. I think that will be helpful for us.
That's an excellent idea. Mr. McElroy, will you include that in our next agenda as part of your presentation, Vogel update?
Yes, I think we'll be in a better position. I heard Mr. Cumber say next or one after next. So I think in the next 30 to 60 days, we'll certainly shoot for the 30-day. But we've got some momentum here on a couple of issues. Rather than bring them half-baked, if we have a fully baked solution, I'd prefer to bring that. So between 30 and 60 days, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anything else? Moving on? Okay. Other new business. Chair has one item of new business. Under the bylaws of JEA, I'm charged with appointing a nominating committee to nominate officers for the board for the succeeding year. And so my appointments in nominating committee are Mr. Cumber, Ms. Flanagan, myself, and Reverend Newbill. So I think we need a motion to adopt that recommendation. Come on, somebody.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Green. She wasn't listed on it. And I'll take Reverend Newbill as a second. Any discussion on the nominating committee? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Okay, nominating committee's approved. If you guys want to appoint a new chair, that'd be fine with me, please. And then also under new business, I have a resolution that I'd like to present honoring former director Dolores Kessler. And I'll just take a moment and read it. Whereas Dolores Kessler has served as secretary of the board of directors of JEA from November 30, 2015 to May 16, 2017, and vice chairwoman of the board from May 16, 2017 to January 31, 2018, and chairwoman of the compensation committee from November 30, 2015 to January 31, 2018. And whereas the board accomplished major milestones in economic development, solar expansion, and record JD Power customer satisfaction scores during her tenure, and whereas her vision and foresight have been invaluable to JEA by doing the right thing for customers, stakeholders, and community, even when it was not the most popular thing. And whereas her focus and calm professionalism have helped guide JEA's strengthening of its financial position, thereby assuring its strong bond rating. And whereas professional dedication, high ethical standards, and appreciation for all things JEA by this consummate gentlewoman will be missed greatly by all of the JEA family. Now therefore be it resolved by the Board of Directors of JEA that it hereby expresses its deep gratitude and appreciation to Dolores Kessler for her lasting contributions as a member of the Board of Directors of JEA. May I have a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber. Second by Reverend Newbill. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Old business. Mr. McElroy, you're up.
Just a couple of key, I'll pass these out, just a key reference points for the board. We're not going to look at this in detail, and I certainly don't expect you to, but if I would ask you just to look at the top page and the second page, and we're looking at the color red, and this is a listing of key metrics as compiled by the American Public Power Association. This look is for utilities with over 100,000 customers, and it's segmented by customer size, then by region, and by those that have generation. I think the key message here, I would just like to say that from 2015 to 2016, and we're 1 year behind in the numbers, we continue to work to reduce the number of red, or the amount of red on the chart or heat map. Red is bad and green is good. We continue to show progress in our key metrics as compared to our peers, so we're continuing to move in the right direction. And this covers really pricing, operating ratios, financial metrics that we measure. But it's sometimes good to get a sense of not only internal measurements or even rating agency measurements, but measurements against our peers nationally, split by customer size, region, and those that have generation and those that do not. So I'll just use that as an example, one further example of the management team and the progress that they're making in terms of constantly and continually improving the business across a broad measure of metrics. Secondly, the metrics, we sort of skipped over it a little bit in terms of the residential electric bills, another significant move. When we look at that and focus really on what we're responsible for in terms of utility charges, we would have been at least one place lower. And if we had then adjusted those utilities that would have come in lower than us with their announced and approved rate increases to occur over the next 3 years, we would have fell 2 positions down. So we continue to be very responsible and focused on managing our customers' money, and we will continue to do so. That's my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. McElroy. Chair has no report. There's nothing else to come before the board. Our next meeting will be March 20, 2018. We stand adjourned. Thank you.